Okay, hello again. This is Dino from the RunCloud show where we interview PHP programmers from around the world and ask them about what they do with PHP. And today I have here with me is Korvin Szanto from the Concrete5, one of the team members of Concrete5. And Korvin Szanto is very passionate about PHP, where he even represents Concrete5 into PHP organizations and what is it called again? The PHP
Framework interoperability group.
Framework Interrupt Group, yeah. All right. So we'll get back. We'll get into that about what that is, about what Concrete5 does, and about what you do. But I guess we can get started right away now. You're good now, Corvin.
Sounds good, yeah.
All right. So why don't we just get started? I guess I'll just hit you with my first question, and that would be, how about we start off with a little bit background about yourself? Tell us about what you did and before PHP, how you got involved and how you got introduced with PHP, and also maybe like way before that, what were you doing?
Well, when I was a young kid, what I like to do is I would spend time on the internet and find different communities that were kind of accepting to me, and I'd pretend to be an adult in these communities, and I would try to interact with people, and that was kind of like, in school I wasn't super popular, so that was kind of like where I got my social skills and where I learned to deal with people and all that kind of stuff. So
That sounds
that's
sad.
yeah. It was a little sad, but it was
Yeah.
fun as a kid. That's kind of what I was doing when I was young. So it kind of ended up naturally flowing into open source and working with code, because those kinds of communities are full of people who are trying to share stuff and trying to write things that they can give to other people to make other people's lives better. And the reason why that was appealing to me is because I was a young kid, and it's kind of hard to pretend like you're an adult. It's easier on a forum because it's not real back and forth. But as soon as you start talking to somebody in real time, it becomes pretty apparent that you're talking to a little kid. So the thing about code is, everybody kind of writes the same code regardless of your age. What really kind of dictates with the kind of code that you write is your experience. And so when I began working with different programming languages, I was quickly able to write some things that were helpful to other people, and got me good feedback and made me feel good about what I was doing. And so I just kind of stuck with it and focused on open source kind of from there on out. So that's pretty much how I got started with open source, and I mean PHP as well. All through these kind of like communities trying to pretend like I'm older.
Okay, so you said about open source mostly, and of course, even though the show is about PHP, but I don't mind like if we talk about other tools and platforms and languages. So what else are you involved in apart from PHP?
In terms of community, I'd say that PHP is about it. PHP has one of the most open and welcoming communities that I've seen, because they're kind of more focused around not doctorate level computer science majors. They're focused around people who kind of all have the same background and the same experiences. So for example, I went to Pacific, or rather PHP UK this year in Brooklyn, and at the end we all went out for breakfast, and we kind of sat and went around the table, and there was probably 15 people there. And they went around the table, and each of them kind of said the exact same story. They said, I was 15, 16 playing an online game with my friends, and I realized that the groups that I had looked up to or that I thought were really good, I realized that they all just had really nice websites. So we went around this table, and everybody just said, yeah, I was really admiring other people's websites, so I built a website for my own group, and that's just how people get started with PHP. So it was kind of eye-opening and interesting to see that we all had that kind of same shared background. And I think that's kind of unique for PHP. So to answer your question in that long roundabout way, PHP is it for me because their community is kind of unique in that it's open to everybody. whereas some of the other things are more focused and require a little bit more training and structure, perhaps.
Yeah, when it comes to the community, of course, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, how about this? So, how old were you when you got started with PHP?
Um, I was probably around 14, 15 when I started working with PHP. Before that, I was working in some other languages that were like the first one I had gotten started on IRC network. So the first
Mm-hmm.
one was scripts for
IC bots.
MIRC, yeah.
Yeah.
MIRC. Specifically, it was tools to help out in IRC help channels. So it would give
Okay.
you
I thought you were nuking people.
no, no, no. I always, I had, I was out there lying to people and pretending like I was older. So it wasn't like I was, you know, I was doing bad stuff. But I, I've always kind of been, I've always been lucky in that my selfishness has steered me to kind of not really altruistic, but steered me to things that kind of help people out instead of hurting people. So, while it is super selfish to go out and try to pretend like I'm
Mm-hmm.
older
Mm-hmm.
than I am, and it's all about my own ego and making me feel good about myself. But at the same time, I was able to kind of cultivate this career that it ended up being, and I was able to give back and help people kind of do what they were doing already, just a little bit more efficient. And I think that that's kind of what bred the love for me in programming and more specifically in open source.
All right. So, 14, 15, you started with PHP. What was your first website?
Um, I never really did a lot of website building with PHP,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of counterintuitive. Um, my first website, though, was just an HTML JavaScript thing that was basically a copy of Google. I went to
Mm-hmm.
Google's page and I straight up took their source code um, and put it on my own website. And then I took Google's logo and I changed it to be my own, like a different word, but very similar. And then I added some kind of funky, cool stuff, like I added a um, list of like random facts that would show underneath, and embedded some of the games I like to play on it. And
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of my first. It was my first, real website, but it was really only kind of for myself,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't really something I was serious about. Um,
So, in that case, when you got started with PHP, what did you do? What projects?
um, with PHP, what I started doing is I started finding things that people had trouble with, and I just started kind of putting out, um, code for it, code to solve those problems. So, for example, I put out a
Yeah.
bunch of regular expressions to do different stuff on websites. I'd go into Stack Overflow and try to answer some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I never really had a really serious project. One of the things that I like to contribute to in kind of the later days when I was 17, 18 is Fabricator. Fabricator is a tool that lets you work with your Git, SVN, or Mercurial, code tracking tools, and it
Mm-hmm.
lets you track your project and track your people and your time and all kinds of stuff. And a really nice interface that's all PHP. And this project was started by a couple of Facebook guys who eventually left Facebook and took this product to be its own kind of standalone thing. So I was contributing to that and working with those guys for a little bit of time, not too seriously. For the most part, I was just putting out code and working with other people on problems that they were dealing with. I never really delved too deep before I got into being a professional developer to the point where I needed too much help.
Okay.
I
Right.
was
So,
helpful to people.
yeah, I think Fabricator, right?
I think it's Fabricator.
Fabricator. All right. Yeah. I had a look at that. I didn't know about that project before. I got to know about that when going through your GitHub. So, to my understanding, Fabricator is a bit like GitHub. Is that right?
Um, yeah, to a large extent, in that GitHub is kind of just a wrapper around Git
Mm-hmm.
that has things like pull requests and issue tracking and conversations and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Fabricator does that same kind of thing, but it also adds more businessy focused tools and stuff like that to the stack. So a lot of the time, Fabricator projects end up getting hosted on both GitHub and in a Fabricator instance, where the
Okay.
Fabricator is kind of for the team, for managing the team working on it, whereas GitHub is like the facade, the front shop. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Okay, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what Fabricator is. So, with Fabricator, you can have your Git project hosted in Fabricator, or is it outside Fabricator?
Yeah. So Fabricator actually wraps around Git, Mercurial, and SVN. So just talking specifically to Git,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you can have your project completely in Fabricator.
Mm-hmm.
The Fabricator is it requires accounts, and it's like it's specific. Somebody has to know what Fabricator is to get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas GitHub is kind of open and ubiquitous. So yeah, I mean, Fabricator is close to GitHub in that it hosts code and it lets you view your commit history and changes and things like that. But it does quite a lot more. It goes quite a lot deeper.
All right. Okay, let's go on into other things. So right now you're with Concrete5. So how did that started?
Well, at the time, I was probably 17, 18, and I was in IRC, in the IRC channel for Concrete5 specifically. At this point in my life, I was working with a WordPress web
Wait,
shop.
wait, time. What year was that?
This was maybe 2011.
2011. All right.
Um, I don't know, I'd have to check my LinkedIn.
All right.
But
2011. Let's just say it's 2011. All right.
I think it's something like 5 or 6 years ago. And I was in a WordPress shop, and I think this WordPress shop kind of realized my skills weren't in writing blogs because my blog writing is terrible. Um, but I can
You were in a WordPress shop. What does that mean?
well, a full service WordPress shop um, does a few things. They um, will sell things like websites to small businesses in the area. So there's an office full of a bunch of people who would call out to businesses in the area and say, hey, your website's trash. We can give you a better one for only too much money. And then they would take a WordPress site and a theme they've already paid for they've paid $20 for this theme once 3 years ago. And they would take that theme and kind of just change some of the CSS on it and add the
Mm-hmm.
logo of the business and add some copy. And then they give that site to the business owner.
Mm-hmm.
And that was relatively expensive. But where the real service came in was in SEO, SEM, where
Mm-hmm.
somebody who purchased a website from them now would get this SEO friendly copy added to their website on a regular basis. They'd get their SEO ranking tracked and things like that.
So it's like a web agency, but more focused on WordPress as a solution.
Yeah, I think it's like an SEO agency that realized at some point that building WordPress sites is it's not that hard to make something that looks okay, and
Mm-hmm.
so started building websites as well. And so the quality of the websites was pretty poor. The security of them is probably not great, and the real service that was offered was this standard. Every few days we'd write you a new blog post that would boost your SEO. And so that job for me was at some point write some blog posts about and a lot of the time it was limousines or dog boarding. So you'd be like, you'd start out, here's all the things I know about dog boarding, and then start
Right.
yeah. And that was soul draining and not where my skills lie. So I think they realized pretty quickly that my blog posts were bad and not really helping.
All right.
They put me on other projects. So the first project that they put me on, they wanted me to rebuild. We were using Sugar CRM at this point to manage customers. And they wanted me to build in to this customer relations manager a tool to track sales and commissions. So as these cold callers were in the back and calling and telling people that their websites suck, they would sell a website. They would get something like 5% of the sale, and then 10% of the sale would go into a manager pool. And here's the key. This manager pool wasn't known by any of the employees except for me, and I kind of got a really deep look at the business by, building a tool that, tracked how much everybody was getting paid. And it turned out that this company had maybe, 12 or 15 employees, and 2/3 of them were managers. And
Oh, wow.
these managers had their own pool, and it was twice the percentage of the salesperson that actually sold it would go into this manager's pool for each sale, and then the managers would split that. And none of that came back to us programmers. It was just really this kind of like cool kids club at the top of these, managers who you wouldn't even know by looking at their job that they were a manager or were included. But anyway, that's where I kind of started out, and that's where I was. And that's the kind of stuff I was working on at this point.
Was that like your first job?
It wasn't necessarily my first job, but it was definitely my first professional programming like this. It was my first step in my career. So at some point, my boss said to me, there's this CMS that it looks a lot nicer than WordPress. It looks a lot more secure. And he asked me to take a look at it. So I started looking at it, and I realized that they were located just in the same city. So that night I went home and I submitted a email to Franz, the CEO. Said, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing and where I'm at. Do you have any internships available? And they were just about to start hiring at this point, so they told me to come in for the interview process. It was actually like a month later or something like that. And I kind of ended up sneaking into a round of new hires because I had sent out an email. But kind of the part I glazed over, during that month, I was kind of hanging out in the IRC channel there. So, like I said, I was always on IRC. So I was in the IRC channel and kind of a member of the community as I was waiting to go to this interview, and kind of delved into it pretty deep. So I kind of gained a love of it and met a lot of friends who are still in the community with me just during that time. So that's kind of how I got started with Concrete5.
So it's kind of like you're also doing your homework before the interview.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So when you first had a look at Concrete5, so what did you think about it?
At that time, I hadn't really dealt with anything that was MVC or object-oriented, so it was something that was completely new to me. So I think that when I saw that, I saw a lot of opportunity in myself to kind of learn and grow as a developer. But having worked with Fabricator a little bit, I also had some knowledge that I felt I could share with the community. So I felt like I had something I could give back, at least right at the outset. But like I mentioned before, I never really built websites the same way that maybe my boss thought that I would be building websites when they hired me at that WordPress shop. That's not really what I ended up doing. So when I looked at Concrete5, and still when I look at it today, I don't really look at it through that lens, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
So I think you are the kind of PHP programmer that some PHP programmer or some web developer, they see a CMS, they try out the CMS. I think in your case, you see the CMS, you go straight into the code and see how it's built. Was it like that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Because I end up trying to answer questions, I kind of try to take that angle in getting familiar with a new service or a new technology. I'll find out what people are struggling with and see where I can help. And that kind of gives me a really deep it kind of naturally gives me a deep understanding of what I'm working with. So in that time, yeah, I got a lot of exposure and a lot of experience just because people are coming into the IRC channel with questions, and I just wanted to be the fastest one to answer, and I wanted to be, all comes back to being selfish, but yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't look at the features that it came with. I kind of looked at the way the code was structured, the way the community interacted. I looked at where I thought I could help, and whether, at that time from the outset, the team that was working on it looked like a team that I wanted to be a part of, because it's code that I don't understand.
Okay.
It's written by people who are generally quiet. I had been in this community for some time at this point, and I'd never talked to anybody on the core team. So it gave us kind of this clandestine, secret society kind of feel to it also. But yeah, I think when I looked at it, really what was appealing to me is the potential to come out from the other side knowing all this code and being able to understand it. And I think that was what was most appealing to me at the time.
All right. I think coming from a WordPress shop and then into Concrete5, my impression or my observation, what's the most different is that instead of doing like client servicing and writing articles for people and whatnot, with Concrete5 they are building their own product. So you're working on something really really specific rather than jumping from one client to another. I think that to some means a lot more. I don't know how it is for you. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right about that. Where at this old WordPress shop, if ever somebody said something like, "Can you build this thing that doesn't exist?" The shop would whiteface and say, "No, absolutely not, because that doesn't exist. There's no add-on that I can, get a junior developer to transform into what you're asking for." And so that kind of experience where it's like, well, no. Well, we can't do that. We'll never be able to do that. This is all magic to us, was like really strange to me, and not at all how I feel about, how I look at the world. So there was many late nights talking to my boss about, we need to find a way to innovate. We need to find a way to make changes to the community instead of just consuming and consuming and consuming. We need to find a way to give back. And I, my argument was that, well, we'll never grow. We'll just constantly be making these blog posts about, this is my favorite funeral home in the West. And that's nothing to be proud of. That's just kind of being a leech, it's kind of, there comes a point in everybody's life where they realize, I've been taken pretty much the whole time. It's about time to give back. And I think I was kind of lucky in that when I was starting out, the only way I could gain notoriety was by giving back. So it kind of put that, kind of geared my selfishness in the right way, which is why I see Concrete5 and I see, this is all this stuff that is being put out by a company that, they're not making any money off of it. They're giving it away for free. And not just that, but they're actively working on it, continuing to give it away for free, which is, I had experience with other open source projects and all kinds of stuff. So I've seen kind of the whole set of different options you have in open source. Like, you have your Linux Foundation, which is going to give you things for free forever, and it's going to fix your security issues. But you also have something like a Sugar CRM, which is they have a free version. They have a free open source version of their paid product, which is essentially just locked down and isn't going to give you what you need for your business. So that kind of really got me excited, seeing that the team was trying to give back, and that's really what was most appealing to me for Concrete5, to be honest. Just to be able to write new code and not be modifying CSS for themes anymore.
All right, yeah. So let the users just do that, and you can focus on your core products.
Right. Exactly.
All right. So honestly, I myself haven't been doing a lot of Concrete5. I did one website with Concrete5. It's quite all right. I think that the first thing that attracted me to Concrete5 was that the in context editing, where I know where the content is. I click on it, I can edit it, and I know where there's a space. I can put new things into that space. So that was one of the things that attracted me to use Concrete5. But in that experience, I've never heard about this Concrete5 console. So I saw that in your GitHub account, and I see that you're working on that. Do you care to explain what that is?
Well, in Concrete5, we've always had kind of like a command line tool that will let you do things like manage your configuration, manage your packages. It can do things like install and uninstall Concrete5. It'll do different developer things that you'll need to do. But there's other things out there for other projects that are quite a lot more powerful. So, for example, the Laravel Artisan command line tool can do things like it'll bootstrap a package for you that you can then install or begin working off of, and it'll do things like that. And I think that kind of thing is the difference between kind of going through blind and going through with a guided tool. So I think that having something like a console tool that will make things simple, it'll do everything you want. I think that's kind of the key to taking Concrete5 from where it's at, where we have a lot of developers in our marketplace who have learned on Concrete5. I have this feeling that this console is what's going to help take a lot of those developers from being that like isolated, working in the browser kind of developer over to kind of closer to my side, and working with Concrete5 through interfaces that are a little bit more familiar. So that's kind of the goal with the console. We've always kind of had a console tool, but this one is going to be separate. It's going to be more fully featured and easier to work with. But that's not even the selling point. The main selling is that it connects to all different versions of Concrete5. So today, if you have the console tool that comes with Concrete5, and then you update your site, you upgrade your site, that console tool might not work anymore because you have to now use the upgraded version of the console tool, and that's at a different path now. And you kind of just have to know that and be aware of it for that to work out. And that's a pain. And since the tool is integrated with Concrete5, since it's part of the project itself, that tool can never be upgraded independently. It could never have its own feature set be released on its own timeline. And what's more important is it'll never connect to those older websites. So what I'm doing here is I'm making something that will connect to any version of Concrete5 and implement these tools for any version of Concrete5. So in my day-to-day, a lot of the time, I don't work with a lot of the legacy versions of Concrete5 anymore. But when I do, I really, really miss the console tools that we do have. So this is something that's going to be very helpful for me, but it's in the very early stages at this point.
All right. So at Concrete5, what else do you do?
My set of jobs include managing security, managing clients, any of our hosting stack, managing all of our websites, like our marketing sites and our community sites and things like that. I handle a lot of our support incoming stuff from our clients. And then I do a lot of client work. And then once all that's done, I start working on open source. So,
Oh wow. Yeah. That's yeah. I think most programmers don't really like to handle customer support unless they really have to. So because they would rather be doing programming.
yeah. Well, I mean, it can be cathartic to have some kind of a different stream to focus on that doesn't require, because support can be really hard. It can definitely be really hard for some of the more involved clients that are doing some more custom stuff. But for the most part, support is really kind of drives itself. You just have to be there to type in the answers.
Mhm.
And so that kind of process can be a little more cathartic than being on the hook to come up with all the implementations and to come up with all of the problems and solve them beforehand. So it can be nice and a nice change of pace to switch over to support.
Yeah.
But to tell you the truth, I would definitely much rather be focused on the open source community and making that stuff better. But with the way the world works, we have to take the good with the bad, and I think that I've unfortunately shown that I can handle support and all that kind of stuff on top of the workload that I have. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. And then, to be honest, I'm not too upset about it. It's fine.
All right. Good for you. Okay. Let's talk about the PHP-FIG, the framework interrupt group. So what is that? Of course, some people know, but let's just go through it. What is that?
The Framework Interoperability Group is a group that was put together by the developers from Zend, from Symfony, from Laravel, from all kinds of different places. And originally what it was meant to be is a group of developers that are working on frameworks, because at the time that this was starting out, PHP was kind of blossoming with tons and tons of frameworks. But none of them work together. So if you use Symfony, you use Symfony. If you use Zend, you use Zend. Those were your options. These days, if you actually look at Concrete5, we're using components from both. And the reason why that's possible, to some extent, is because the Framework Interoperability Group exists and was there to put out standards that helps these things kind of work together. So some examples of some things that the FIG has done so far that we make use of. PSR 0 is a auto-loading PSR. It tells you how you can pull in files based on class names. So
okay. One quick one. Before we get into too deep, just a quick explanation. What is a PSR?
A PSR is a standard recommendation. So the actual acronym is PHP Standard Recommendation.
So when it's numbered, it's for specific topics, right? Like PSR 0, like you said, it's all about auto-loading. Right.
Right. So
Okay.
the flow of it, somebody will come with an idea and say, this is something we should standardize. And so we'll kind of give it a nickname and talk about it for a little bit. And then we'll hold a vote to see if this is something we really think we should standardize. And if we vote yes, we'll give it a number, and we'll thereby refer to it by that number forever. So this PSR 01, which I was going to go list through a few of them, so I'll do it quickly. PSR 0 does auto loading, and auto loading was a big thing at the time, because we were all doing things like require once all of our files or manually including our things in, and that's not fun. So PSR 0 does auto loading. It was later replaced by PSR 4, which is something that people use today. PSR 0 isn't really in use by most people. Then there's PSR 1 and 2, which are both about code style. And then there's PSR 3, which is logging. So these are pretty much the 4 core ones that we make use of. All of our code is PSR2 style formatted. We use PSR4 auto loading. And then PSR3 is logging. It lets us log things in a specific way. We use that as well. So the FIG is just kind of a group that is made up of competing projects that gets together and tries to find ways that their competing projects can work together. And so those examples are probably the least interoperability enabling examples. But if you can imagine PSR3, the logging stuff, the way that it would work is we can say that as long as you give us a PSR3 logger, we know to log things. And so we can kind of give up control of where we get that logger to the end user, and the end user can say, here, don't use this logger that Concrete5 comes with. Use this different one that comes with Zend, or use this one from Laravel because it works a lot nicer, or anything like that. And because you can say that nowadays, because things aren't kind of locked into one framework or the other, things can be kind of swapped out on the underside really easily. And these days, we're actually seeing more and more frameworks that don't actually have any business logic. They just have code that ties together these different components that are, are somewhat arbitrary. So some of these projects don't even include a logger. They'll just say you have to have a logger if you want to use us.
And they can pick and choose from any one of the variables that comply to the PSR.
Exactly. And the thing about PSR3, I gave probably the worst examples. These are some of just the first ones that we put out there. The thing about PSR3 is logging is kind of something that you can do well a couple of ways. And one project called Monolog actually took that and did it pretty much as good as you can do it. And so for the most part, everybody just uses Monolog. But I think where the benefit comes in is in the future, if ever Monolog, changes the way they work, or they stop being supported, or something else comes that's better, we can swap that out, in 30 seconds of work instead of multiple months of rebuilding and re-architecting and backwards compatibility changes. And I think that's where the real benefit comes in. In the future, you'll see something like Concrete5 will be open to any logger. It'll be open to any HTTP objects. It'll be it'll be compliant with all these different PSRs. And for the most part, we are compliant at this point. But that's where we're working towards. So the FIG is a group that comes up with standards that makes it easy to work together. Too long didn't.
Yeah. Also, there's FIG, and Concrete5 is also part of FIG. I think that kind of like summarize what it is. So ever since you got started with PHP and until up to this point, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes and how PHP has evolved. I think one of the biggest one is definitely PHP 7 and whatnot, and also with FIG and name spacing and all those, and Composer. What are your thoughts on all these changes?
I think that things are going in the right direction. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying, where the PHP community is kind of unique among languages, and I think that this is one of the what you're saying is one of the biggest reasons why. Certainly, other communities are affected by big projects. So a good example of that might be how Linux has been affected by Docker. Docker is a project that's built on Linux components and things that Linux pretty much already has in it. But Docker makes it kind of a lot better, makes the ecosystem around those features exist and builds upon it. And I think that's a really cool thing to see just in any community, especially open source. So where you say like Composer that's such a big thing in PHP these days. The pair package manager that we used to have, you know, I don't want to say anything bad about it, but the one thing that I will say is it installs things in a global way. And so if you want to have different dependencies for different projects, that's just not going to happen. You have to have your dependencies be in a global spot. And that works for a specific reason, for, you know, reasons that make sense. But it doesn't really lend itself to PHP development in the way that we do it today. And so Composer has been so nice in terms of, you know, these are the things that my project requires to run. In the past, what we've done is we've just included these things manually, and we've kind of locked ourselves down to a version. So what would happen is, and this never did happen, but if ever one of these things that we had taken and kind of embedded into Concrete5, if they had a security issue, we'd be just kind of shit out of luck. We'd have to release a new version of our software that has that security issue mitigated, and we have to, you know exactly what happened, and we have to somehow find out that that security issue existed. Whereas with Composer, everything's kind of version based, so we just tell it we need a newer version than this version, and it'll give us back, you know, whatever matches best. So if that project were to have some kind of security issue, they could fix it in all their versions and push that out, and you could kind of protect yourself just in place without having to update Concrete5 at all. And I think that shift from, you know, we're using this dependency, so it's got to be part of our package, like it's part of our code base. I think that shift away from that has been really good for the community, and I think that it's going to show. I think we're going to see a lot better things coming out in the coming years, with things like what I was saying, where frameworks aren't really, there's not much business logic in frameworks anymore. They're just kind of tying together different libraries, and I think that's a good way to go. I think that's smart, and I think it's breeding a community in PHP that is more open to being more open to cross-pollinating, if you will. So we're open to saying, you know, this community uses the same dependencies as me, so we have these common you know, lines where we can talk, or you know, this other community is not using this in a way that we're using it, and we can help them, you know, build up on that. So it kind of gives us all this commonality, and gives us all this place where we can rally. And that's just Composer specific. I think that you know, the other things you mentioned, like PHP-7, have been really good as well, but to a lesser extent. I think PHP-7 is a consequence of a bigger issue in the PHP ecosystem, and that issue has been Facebook reaching in and building things. So Facebook made the hip-hop virtual machine, which made PHP really fast and gave it kind of a strict subset. And people started using that, and people started really liking that. And so the open source community of PHP, because PHP doesn't have, there's no benevolent dictator in PHP. PHP is fully open source and everything's done by vote. So in order to get anything done in a community like that, you have to kind of lobby and sway the minds of more than single persons. You have to kind of sway the minds of the entire community, and that's a real challenge with something the size of PHP.
Right.
So Facebook came in and built these things that were way faster, way easier to use, and better. And I think it kind of lit a fire under a lot of people, and it kind of showed people what things could be. You know, like PHP doesn't have to be this slow language. These are just kind of mistakes that we've made that make it slow. And so kind of revisiting that and fixing that has just been a consequence of the fact that hip-hop is a thing, and that Facebook is kind of putting in that external pressure. So I think that has been a really interesting dynamic, and I think it's been really good for the community, because we have gotten PHP-7, which is so much faster than things like Ruby and Python and all kinds of stuff. The one thing I will say about PHP-7 is in communities like Concrete5 and Drupal and WordPress and all these different things, for the most part, the code is pretty fast already. You'll get a lot of wins in terms of memory management with PHP 7. But by and large, where a site is spending a lot of time waiting is in waiting for the responses to the database requests or for a file to load or things like that. So by and large, the increase in speed for Concrete5 sites or for any kind of CMS site would be about 20–30% on a good site that has good queries. But for the most part, websites have really bad queries, and they're already waiting 300 milliseconds for our query to return the result. So their 100 milliseconds in PHP taking half as long doesn't really look as impressive. So I think that that's been kind of a damper on this whole, like, PHP 7 is great and all that stuff movement. But I think what's been nice with the rest of the ecosystem is we've kind of moved on since PHP 5. Back when PHP 5 landed, it took years before anybody was using it or before you could actually use it in like any hosted environment because people weren't supporting it, people weren't offering it. And so what we ended up having to do is campaign to get people to adopt the newer version. And that's no good.
Oh yeah, so you're saying that hosting and people are still using PHP 4
They were at the time, yeah.
during those times. Yeah, all right. So it took a while for people and companies and hosting companies to adopt and offer that PHP 5. All right, okay.
Yeah, so there was an effort called Go PHP 5 where a community-led team would reach out to companies and tell them, like, here's why you need this stuff, and here's what you're doing to the community by not offering it. And I think that those were quite different times. And I think that we were even still dealing with that when I first started with Concrete5 more so than we are now. So to kind of illustrate what I'm trying to say here, when I started with Concrete5, it took maybe 2.5 years or more to get us from being a PHP 5.2 minimum to being a PHP 5.3 minimum. And when I started at Concrete5, PHP 5.3 was already out. It was already, I believe PHP 5.2 was already end of life, so it wasn't getting any security updates or anything like that. But the thing about it was, when we actually did this, I think PHP 5.4 had already been released as well. And the web hosts were all on PHP 5.2. They didn't even offer PHP 5.3. And so when I would try to campaign and say, we need to go PHP 5.3 because here are all these features we can make use of, like here's the speed benefits and things like that, the pushback would be, well, we can't host this anywhere. Why would we release a project where it's impossible to install it anywhere? That's really reasonable. And I think that was one of the biggest pain points because there's not much you can do. We could reach out to hosts and say, like, you guys are really making it so that we can't upgrade. But at the same time, hosts can say, well, WordPress still supports PHP 5. So that kind of dynamic and community focus wasn't really leading itself to what we have today, where PHP 7 comes out and you already have PHP 7 based projects out there. And I just foresee it being a lot easier to switch to PHP 7 than it ever was to switch to PHP 5.3 because hosts have kind of come around and seen the light and seen that not just they're holding the community back by not offering those newer versions. I think really where it ended up talking is in the dinero, the money they people more, they get that kind of niche subset of developers by offering what's new and what's supported. And I think they realized that they can make more money by doing that. And the last thing I'll say about that is the tools in the ecosystem. Things like cPanel were much more prevalent back in the day, but like distributions like Ubuntu offering PHP 7 just right off the bat, CentOS offering PHP 7 and that kind of stuff, that's just huge. That didn't exist in the past. So even if these web hosts were like, okay, well, we're negatively affecting the community, let's change that, they would have to invest, a lot of money in building the technology to support this stuff. So that was kind of like, we were stopped by the hosts. The hosts were stopped by the Linux distributions, and who knows what the Linux distributions were stopped by. So now that that's kind of not the case, everything's kind of upgrading a lot faster, and I think that that's been really nice, and I think that that's going to be really good. I think we'll see when PHP 8 lands. I think we'll be a lot faster to adopt.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that with PHP 7, the adoption may be like from PHP 4 to PHP 5 last time, more or less like that. So now when PHP 7 is out, sorry, we are generally the PHP programmers, the PHP developer community, and the PHP projects are facing more or less the same resistance from hosts and whatnot. Yeah, I think I understand.
I think it started out that way, but now that the tools and things are kind of catching up with the rest of it, I think that it's going to be a lot easier. But there's still some resistance for sure.
Yeah. I think one thing that is different from last time though, last time you only have hosts, shared hosting, and you have dedicated host. And dedicated hosts are really expensive. But nowadays there's providers like DigitalOcean, Vultr, Linode, whereby you can get a server for $5 and you can install whatever you want. So I think more and more developers, programmers, especially those who are skillful in that sense, they can set up their own servers, and maybe I do believe like things like this the cloud hosting services and tools like what we have, like the RunCloud and even our competitors, where it helps make server deployment a lot easier, like Server Pilot, Laravel Forge, and all those, does help in adoption of the PHP 7, I think.
Yeah, I think that we've been using Forge and DigitalOcean, and that's been really nice. Because as long as we're using that kind of stack and we have that set up, the promise is that we should never really have to worry about it. As long as we keep setting things up, it should always be the latest PHP version, just at the time that we set it up, and beyond that, like there's not really any kind of outside factor affecting that PHP adoption rate. It's just going to be down to me as a developer. Like, do I know what PHP 7 does? Do I feel comfortable with my code base on that version? And I think that those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves, and not like, oh, well what's going to happen to my wallet if I, try to protect my users. So I think that's been really good, and I think that the direction that PHP is going as a whole is really good. And that's even to say, at this point, the place that PHP's in, I would say, is really good at this point. I have a really good time in the community and in doing what I do.
I have this one question though. You see, like with all these changes, and I think the change, it's good for the community, it's good for PHP itself, for the projects. But because how fast PHP is changing, especially when you jump straight away into 7 and whatnot, there's a lot of changes there, and with composer, namespacing, auto-leading, and all those stuff, some, maybe quite a huge number, are still struggling to adapt. It's like, okay, now there's namespacing, and I don't really understand how that works and stuff like that. What's your opinion on that, or maybe any advice you can give?
Well, like I said at the beginning, PHP isn't really a community of computer scientists. We're kind of a community of people who have had problems and needs and have solved them for ourselves. And so the tool that we ended up using at the time was PHP, and that's kind of where we find ourselves now. but I think that it's important to remember, where we were. We didn't come into this world knowing how to work with PHP. We just at some point needed to know it, and at the point that we needed to know it, it was this way. And so the idea that now it's a different way, think we should stop that and go back to the way it was when I learned it. That doesn't really resonate much with me, because as somebody who learned the language just by doing, I'll just do the same thing with PHP 7. I'll do the same thing with PHP 7.1. I'll find out what features they have, and then I'll just use them until I understand them. And I mean, I understand the human natural resistance to that, but I think it's a matter of people losing sight of where they came from, and losing sight of the fact that, this is a tool for sure, but this is something that gives. It's something that's giving to us, and so we can't assume, it's that old story of the giving tree that just keeps giving and giving and giving until it's just a dead stump. You can't just expect this to keep giving to you and not requiring anything back. And I think that if you do keep taking and taking and taking and not ever giving anything back, you're just going to get left behind. And so if you want to be a professional, if you want to be, working in this and feel good about the code you're writing, I think that you have to keep learning. You're just going to have to keep learning.
How about those that starting out with PHP, like they're building their first website now, and they're starting to learn PHP, and the learning curve, like how it used to be, was not that difficult, but now it's a bit longer. Same advice.
I don't know that I'd agree with that.
Okay.
The language is all the same. If you get somebody who doesn't know PHP and have them start working with code, it's gonna be quite some time before they start asking questions like, why do we need namespacing, or why are we auto loading, and things like that. These are questions that kind of come up as these are questions that you ask when you come from this old ecosystem, whereas learning on it, these are just facts of life, right? So to equate it to like learning math, you never get told why a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You learn that in calculus several years later. They just tell you that this rule is going to work, and you have to at some point take that at face value and just kind of run with that before you can build up the knowledge and the ability to understand actually what's happening under the scene. And I think that that's just always true with programming. When you look back at your career learning programming, what you see is the lens of what you know. You're thinking, well, what did I struggle with? And you're like, okay, well, what seems difficult to me now? And I just don't think that that's the way that people organically kind of deal with these things. They come up with a problem like, okay, well, I need a dependency, and then they say, well, how do I get that? They Google it, they don't find it. They go to Stack Overflow, they say, how do I do this? And then somebody just said, oh, use Composer. And then it's like, there's no mental leap there to be like, well, how does Composer work? Why is Composer part of the ecosystem? None of that happens. They just run the commands that they were told to run, and then that's, now it works. And I think that's good for the ecosystem. Definitely think that there are parts of the language that people don't understand because of that. But what I don't believe, and what I would vehemently disagree with, is the idea that new developers have a harder time learning PHP. I think they have an easier time learning it.
What I'm taking from what you just said, so you're saying something like, when you're new to PHP, of course you're gonna learn all the variables, the loops, and the while, and all those operators and whatnot. Those with just any program, you're just gonna go through that. But of course, when you come to stumble upon dependencies, object oriented, you come to stumble upon what else, namespacing, whatnot, you should already have some understanding or at least some basics of the programming, and just deal with it?
Well, I think that you'll have more. What I'm saying is you'll definitely have those things, but at this point, in the past, when I say I need a dependency, what's the answer to that? The answer is it's a unique answer every time. You have to look at your situation, find that dependency, maybe embed it in your own thing. What happens if you have code that collides? Now you have to figure out how to. What I'm saying is that today, all I have to do is find out that I have to write composer require, and then I type that in and I'm done. Whereas in the past, you have to really fully understand a lot of nuance and problems that have just been solved already by open source and by the community in things like Composer and in things like PSR4 auto loading. To some extent, you do have to still learn it, but I don't think that the whole namespacing thing, I don't think that's a question for people. I think that that's just, when I learned, class names were class names. Now they also have a namespace. And I mean, if I want to be able to explain and teach the nuance, the actual underlying reasoning for namespacing and things like that, yeah, there's a big learning curve for that, and you have to know more about language design and things like that. But I don't think that that's the angle that most PHP developers take. I think that today, if I was a developer just getting started with PHP, what I would do is I would go and maybe see Laravel and just do like whatever Laravel says, like composer install, and then I'd have auto loading, I'd have namespacing, I'd have all these things that we're talking about here, but it's already done. I don't have to think about it at all. And so I think that because of that, the barrier of entry, if anything, is way lower than it was many years ago. I think that the idea that now, because I'm coming from this old ecosystem, I have to learn these things, which is totally true. That's not the same experience. That empirical kind of like, I have to build on this knowledge I already have. That's not what people have when they come into the language. They'll come in and they have to take things at face value and not understand the nuances underneath. But later they'll come around to understanding those things, and perhaps that's more difficult to understand than doing things like require once. But I don't think that that's a barrier of entry, to be honest. I think that's a barrier of being an expert for sure.
All right.
But it's a barrier of entry.
All right. Okay. I think we've covered a lot. Because this is going out to hopefully PHP programmers. Any last word that you can share?
I think that if I were to say anything to PHP developers, the one thing that I would say is get out there. You're going to have a meetup in your area. A good website to find meetups is php.ug. The user group website it'll show you your local user groups and local meetups that happen nearby. The number one thing that you can do as a developer is go out there and talk to somebody. And I don't mean like talk to a therapist. I just mean like find somebody who understands the troubles that you have and talk to them, because you're going to find out. I think what you'll end up finding out is that you are way more confident in the things that you do know, and you know where you can improve. And those two things are very, very, very valuable to any programmer. And that's not even getting into the point where you start making friends. And so that's the one thing that I would say. Definitely get out there and find a meetup or find a convention, find something that you can go to where you're talking to real people who have the same problems you do, because there's definitely a lot of them out there. So
don't just talk to the machine.
Yep.
All right. All right. Yeah, thank you very much. I think this was great. This was fun. And maybe we'll do this again sometime if we have other stuff to talk about. I guess that's it then. Korvin, thank you very much for doing this with me. Send regards to Franz and Andrew. Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Let me know if you ever want to interview me again. I know a few things, but I definitely know a lot of PHP. So.
Sure, we'll do.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.